Hi, everyone. It's Sarah and Teresa joining you. What did we decide we're calling this? I always forget because I think we name it something different.
Something like periodic conversations.
Periodic conversations with Sarah and Teresa. Uh, but in truth, Teresa and
Mm,
I were having a very real conversation about some challenges that we both have experienced or maybe are experiencing. And then we had this thought, let's explore this together because we know that other people may be experiencing this as well. And the other thing that I'll share is that this is actually a topic that we explore in this week and next week's podcast. And so the thing that we're talking about is just how do we navigate our preferences when it comes to health during the holidays, right? How do we navigate having conversations with family members so that we're on the same page related to our preferences from a COVID precaution perspective, our preferences just from like germ, navigating germs, right? Because everyone is on a spectrum with that.
mm.
And and the reality is we both have been in situations where there's been real consequences, both to relationships, but also to health when we didn't have those conversations. Teresa, what would you want to add, as
I,
we get into this?
yeah, no, that was a beautiful kickoff. Something that's coming up for me, because this is pretty fresh in my mind, is that a trap I fell into was making the assumption that what we had agreed to in the past was still in place this time. So for our family, that meant exercising good precautions for about a week or so before, testing before we came, and then agreeing to mask if we had symptoms. And so I fell into the trap of assuming that what we had agreed to in the past was happening, and that was not the case. So I think as we're getting started and thinking about places where that friction can happen, those sandpaper moments, right? Relying
Mhm.
on the conversations we had before to guide us in this new season is not a good it's not a good strategy.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I mean, I've shared a little bit about my experience this year, and when we did catch COVID
Mm,
was from a similar situation where
yeah.
we thought we went into it with family thinking we were all going to be exercising the same. I went in making assumptions about expectations, and so we want to be really clear. So, obviously it's going to become clear Teresa's and our preferences, but we also understand that everyone has different preferences. So we're not necessarily here to judge. We're just here to talk about how do we talk about it? Because what
Hmm.
happens is that when we don't talk about our expectations and then we don't meet our expectations or our values get stepped on, those can cause real issues to our relationships that aren't just acute, but can become long lasting. And yeah, so I think that, so we just want to talk a little bit for those of you who may be in a similar spot, navigating like, hey, how do we, or maybe
Hmm.
you're navigating. I know I have some family members who are much more cautious than I am. My risk tolerance is very different. I've got, whatever
Yep.
the case is. I have kids in school, I have whatever. And so
Yep.
how do we navigate this? And, I mean, one of the things that we often talk in our work is that we tend to not focus on the togetherness or the relationship until there's a problem. And sometimes we can't avoid that because we don't realize we needed to be thinking about it. But this is a really good example. We know that we'll likely be getting together with people in the holidays. We know potentially you may be like us, you'll be actually living with family members in the same house for a while. And and it's just really good to have conversations around preferences and needs and asking for consent. For those of you who are watching this, and if this is resonant for you, I encourage you to check out the show that I did with Stephanie Chin. And we have a spicy conversation, and we actually role play how you can have these kind of conversations specifically around talking about COVID. But one of the things that she has really taught me is this idea of consent, right? Like, would you be open to talking about this? Here's what I need to feel comfortable. Would you be
Mm.
open to honoring that, or whatever the language might be? And so I think that that's a great point to bring up, Teresa, is that idea that like because something was true before, or because we were on the same page before, we
Hmm.
shouldn't necessarily assume we're on the same page now. And that's not from a place of doubt. That's not from a place of skepticism. It's just from a place of clarity. Because we both have experienced, and I'm sure people have experienced with us, like, oh, wait, this was different than what I was thinking, because this isn't what we did last time. And I think that's just a really good call out for people to think about and go, what are the expectations you've set in the past? And check in, is that still true? Like, that may
Mm-hmm.
even be like, hey, last time we got together on vacation, we tested ahead of time. If
Mm-hmm.
somebody
Mm-hmm.
got sick, we wore masks, we tested then, or whatever the case might be. um and from my perspective, like, I'm very clear that I used to be an incredibly sick person all the time.
Mm.
I mean, Teresa, I feel like I spent 4 to 5 months out of the year just sort of chronically sick with
Yes.
sinus infections.
Yes.
And so when we talk about health, this isn't just about COVID. This is just
Yeah.
about, you know, we know RSV is increasing. We know that the
Yeah.
flu is increasing. We also just know that people have preferences, whether it's because they're immune
Mhm.
compromised, it's their own preferences, all of those things.
They've got a vacation coming up. I mean,
Yeah,
like fill in the
they
blank.
have a big work event
Yeah.
coming up
Yeah.
afterwards. They have something they're looking forward to. Again, like, we've experienced all of this,
So many of those scenarios.
and have experienced some losses because of this. But what
Yeah.
else is coming up for you?
I think something that came up in our conversation that I think I know in an academic way, and then I kind of took for granted in the real life was it's so much easier to talk proactively
Mm,
when you're not having feelings about it and it's just kind of delightfully factual or behavioral, like these are some things I would like. How does that fit with what you might be comfortable with? Or how do these terms? Because the repairing conversation has a lot of emotions tangled up
yeah,
with it.
yeah,
And it's not that we want to avoid those or don't want to have them. They're just more challenging, probably time consuming to have and to prep for, to actually engage in, and to recover from, as opposed to that really proactive conversation where everything can be relatively unemotional, pretty clear. You've got some time still to renegotiate. That feels so much better and so much more efficient for everyone who has an efficiency eye out there.
yeah, yeah. Well, and that's a great point, is like, yeah, just to be very sort of, factual. Now, that said, I get that for those of us who have struggled asking for what we need, that can feel really
Yes.
scary,
Oh,
and or can
yes.
feel uncomfortable. And, but again, lesson learned from both of us, having
Mm-hmm.
experienced situations where we didn't get clear, and then there was decisions
Yeah.
that were made that either, that in both cases put loved ones at risk, and then in some cases actually caused sickness and illness, some pretty significant sickness and illness.
Yeah.
Um, the damage to the relationship was much harder to heal than the illness on some levels.
Yeah.
And so, so some things that can look like is, hey, I'm really excited to I'm really excited to, like, I'm thinking about my situation
Mm-hmm.
and knowing that I'm going to be spending pretty much like, handful of days with both families. We stay together in houses. We, you know, will coexist for a while. Is, hey, I just want to make sure that we all can feel really comfortable and good coming into this. Can we talk about what our expectations are, especially related to our health and wellness?
Mm-hmm.
Here's what I need to feel comfortable. Would you be open to that? What do you need from us?
Mm.
And just be really clear about it. And if it's a situation where, maybe the response is like, no, we don't need to do that anymore, whatever, we can honor someone else's
Oh,
preferences while
yeah.
also honoring our boundaries, right? So then we get to make the choice. Are we comfortable with that? Or are we, willing to say, that's fine. If you don't want to, then how we're going to spend time with you is going to look different. We're not going to spend, the weekend with you, or, we may choose to wear a mask, or whatever the case might be,
Mm-hmm.
if people are showing up sick. Because one of the things that, and I'll share this very personally, as Teresa and I have been talking before hopping on this call, is it's not, on one hand, it is about protecting our health. Right? I don't want to be sick, and I don't want you to get sick.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to spread
Yeah.
you don't need my germs. But on the other hand, it's about being able to really clarify, what do you need to feel safe? What do you need to feel supported? What do you need to feel cared for by
Yeah,
the other
valued,
person?
valued in
Valued.
the relationship for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because we've heard stories from other people, we've experienced it ourselves, where because that clarifying conversation didn't happen up front, the behaviors were different than what we were expecting. And so on some level, it wasn't just about the fact that I got COVID, but it was the fact that my concerns were dismissed. It was about the fact that I didn't feel like there is a consideration or a courtesy to protecting the rest of us, which
Mm,
feeling disrespected, that's a heavier and weightier emotion.
yeah.
So I think that what we're learning and what we're talking about is first, right, exactly the point that Teresa made. Don't assume expectations are the same, even if they've been the same, even if you've been on the same page before. Be really clear about what that is and what that looks like, and come at it from a place of conversation. Like, I want to make sure this
Hmm.
is really good for both of us. I want to
Yeah.
make sure that I understand, what do you need? We talk about collaborative commitments all the time. Like, what do you need for this weekend to be really great? And maybe,
Hmm.
like, I actually, a fun question I was asking my nieces and nephews is like, hey, when we come back during the time that we'll be back for the holidays, like, what is something that you want to make sure we really do? Like, what is it,
It's
like,
fun.
what would be really special? And even that is practicing asking for needs and preferences. And what I loved, and what's actually was so
Mm.
beautiful, is I said, I want at least one night where we're in pajamas just watching Christmas movies. Like, I love that. I want to be snuggled on the couch. And my niece Monica said, I really love when you pick me up from school. So can I have one day when you pick
Oh,
me up from school? And so it's like, okay, I need to make sure that we have enough days
yeah.
that we're home where I can do that. And so, like, honoring preferences and needs can
Yeah.
both be for protection and also
Yeah.
can be for joy. And like,
Yeah.
what do you want to, what would make this really great for you? And as a way for us to practice listening to other people's needs, figuring out what we can honor about it versus like how we want
Yeah.
to honor our boundaries, and having those conversations. Um, I know for me, one of the things I struggle with is when I get in the moment, if someone is sick,
Mm,
it's, again, especially if we're like living together, that's
mm.
different. Obviously, that's different than like, oh, we're going out for dinner and I can, keep a distance.
Yeah.
I can take some
Mhm.
precautions. But then just like, what does that look like in the moment? Again, I think if we can have the conversations up front, then we can remove some of that uncertainty because
Yeah.
we've made agreements on how we're going to show up. Yeah.
I completely agree with you. And I think, as I'm kind of replaying the situation I was in a bit of a freeze response. I just
Mhm.
kind of shut down. I was really overwhelmed. And I think some of it was linked to, I don't mind sharing that I had a really bad COVID experience,
Yeah.
even being fully vaccinated and boosted. And so I think some of it was freezing, thinking I don't want to end up back there again. It took a
Yeah.
while to get
Yeah.
back to myself. And so I think had I not assumed that expectations would be the same, had a more proactive conversation, and when we think about that work of holding steady,
Mm.
even considered up front, what if even with these good steps in place, it doesn't happen? Um, what because I would definitely be more likely to have a freeze or a fawn with
Yeah.
family at a holiday than any other
Yeah.
stress
Yeah.
response, right? I
Yeah.
couldn't
Yeah.
flight. It was my own house,
Yeah.
and fighting isn't usually my default anyway. So I probably, in retrospect, should have spent more time thinking about what's kind of plan C. If
Yeah.
check the assumptions, be that have that proactive conversation. I agree with you about things we're excited about. What special treats do we want, or picking up from school, that kind of thing, the things that bring joy and some of the safety stuff. And now, if all if round one and two don't go so well, how am I going to hold steady in the moment? Because I was very caught off guard, and just went into a bit of a freeze. I felt very
Mm.
numb. I felt very overwhelmed. Um, I was so kind of numbed and overwhelmed by it. I didn't even reach out to people in my circle to say,
Mm,
I'm having a freeze response. What
mm,
should I mean, I
mm,
just really closed off. So that's another thing I'd leave folks with, thinking about holding steady, because one of my mantras when I'm in a freeze is push the words out. I have to like
mm,
plug
mm,
in and push the words out.
mm.
And I had not thought about that in advance, and I felt very overwhelmed. So,
Yeah, that's a no, I mean that's yeah, I resonate with all of that because there are just different layers. And again, like you're like,
yeah,
okay, well, we're here, and
yeah,
also like, and I don't know about your family, but if you're a family that doesn't speak honestly, if you're a family that
yeah,
doesn't push back, if you're a family that doesn't set
yes,
boundaries,
yes,
it
I would
can be
agree with all those
really,
things. Hmm.
it can like escalate. It can feel
Hmm.
escalatory. Is that a word? It can
Yes,
feel
yes,
escalatory when someone does do it. And, and I think that, something that I'm learning to do, and I love that practice of push the words out, is, realize that who can I go to or what do I need? Because I'll have the reaction. And then it's like you become paralyzed. And in the moment, you might not be able to
yes,
think about the words, but then maybe it just needs some time to
yeah,
go, okay, partner, spouse, family, friends, I'm in this situation. I'm trying to strategize. So that I think is a practice I want to take on for myself and invite others of like, if you find yourself in a situation where you're like, I know I need to say something, and I'm not even sure what to say or how to
mm,
say it, who do you have in your life that can help you navigate through that? What are some things you can think about? And again, like we can be clear and kind. We
mm,
can say, I would just feel more comfortable. Like if you'd be like, would you be willing to wear a mask? I would feel more comfortable because it's clear you have, or in both of our cases where somebody showed up sick, like I would feel looking back, I wish I would have been clearer about, can we go get a test just so we know? It
mm,
might not be, but then we
yeah,
just know. And
yeah,
like, and an agreement, and then there are decisions that we may make for ourselves. I mean, those were
yeah, mhm,
decisions that, not that it protected protected me in my situation earlier this year, but it's like I'm gonna wear a mask. I'm gonna once I knew that I had symptoms, like I'm gonna wear a mask.
mhm,
I'm going to isolate until I can get into town and do
yeah,
this. So then you might have to make choices. Like it may be that we don't spend the night. It may be that we just come out for a little bit. It may be that we need to, be in a bigger room, or it may just be that like, hey,
yeah,
I want to spend time with you, but I think this was something, when Steph and I did our role play, she said, sometimes I just really focus on like, me, I'm like I'm a worrier. And for me to feel really good and comfortable, this is what I need. And so let's just wait and get together once you're feeling better so I can be
yeah,
really present with you because I just won't be able to enjoy it. So you make it
yeah,
about again, your needs,
hmm,
and the other thing is, there can always be follow-up conversations of, hey, next time we need to talk about that. I mean, that's something that in our family, there absolutely will be some really clear expectations
mm,
of just like, how are we going to show up or what do we need? And
yeah,
where are we at? And if other people again have different needs and preferences than my own, then
yeah,
I just do what I need to do to feel good in the situation. And I mean, I think that the biggest thing is I think it's always important. One of the practices we always talk about is anchor to something bigger than the conversation, right? Maybe the anchoring is um I love, I love you, right? Like, and I want to make sure that we have a really good time. In the podcast, one of the things Stephanie talks about is like, our relationship is bigger than this conversation,
mm,
right? But we need to like talk about this. And I want to talk about this,
mm,
like
mm,
just, I want to set the stage that like, I care about you more than this conversation, right? Like just to anchor
yeah,
us and like, I love you. And what I don't want to have happen
yeah,
is X, Y, and Z. And so I just know for me that if we don't talk about this, that could cause some, and the thing that I'm thinking about as we're talking too is, we were talking about like even like the good stuff is we can be preemptive about like what are the things that stress you out when we get together and what are some things we can do to reduce it.
yeah,
like,
Yeah.
something we've talked about, I know in other shows is, right, I'm more extroverted, Nick is more introverted. I have a huge family. There's 20 of us when we get together. That becomes a lot for his stimulation. So something that we just know is like, I just know, and we've had to negotiate. He's like, I'm just going to need some one-on-one time, quiet up in the
Yeah.
bedroom where I can just read or I can play a game or something where I can just get away a little bit from the
Yeah.
stimulation. And it's like, great, if that's what you need to be able to show up at your best, then that's great. And I know that that's easier said than done, especially if you have family members who maybe you would identify as like narcissistic or, right, not
Mm.
able to honor. And in which case, then we do what we can to protect ourselves. Final
Yeah.
thoughts, Teresa. Yeah.
Well, as you were sharing those techniques and some of that very specific wording that really resonated with me, I couldn't help but think we've been talking about it through this context of health and
Mhm.
COVID and germs, but I was thinking insert anything you want to talk about, dietary needs,
Yeah.
dietary preferences. I know we have a family member who's vegan, and so navigating that up front,
Yeah.
can dishes be clearly labeled, or could we make this substitution, or could we keep a couple potatoes aside this way? Like, so insert that, or bringing your pet, or
Yeah.
insert any issue. This
Right.
was our lens because it was very fresh,
Yeah. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
certainly could apply this to practically every scenario for getting
Yeah,
together with other humans.
you have a grandma that wants to give the noisiest gifts ever,
Oh, yeah.
and like, or you, I mean,
Yeah.
I see this, there's this dynamic in my family of like, we don't need any more gifts. My parents like the
Oh,
gifts are our
yeah.
love language. And how do we, and so it's like, what's the meat in the middle here?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is like, okay, like
Yeah.
one, okay, I'm going to agree to one or two, right? Or I'm going to
Yeah.
be like, here's just having those conversations.
Yeah.
But you're right. Like, I mean, it can be about anything. And a lot
Yeah.
of times, especially with families, we have to understand that our default responses are usually the default we've developed as children, right?
Mm.
Like we have
Hmm.
the most common patterns with our family, assuming we've spent a lot of time with our family. So I shouldn't, not everyone has that relationship with their family. So I want to just name and
Yeah.
honor that. But that we have developed these patterns of responses. It's kind of like something I've had to, work through over the last
Hmm.
10 years is like, why
Yeah.
am I responding like a snotty teenager? And it was like, well, because I have 30 years of experience in this moment being a snotty kid and
Mm.
like,
Yeah.
and having to really be intentional about how do I want to show up and how do we get what we need and how do we honor. And the thing I will say is like, as we've been working on this, and when I say when we as a team have been working on
Mm.
this, like when Teresa and I travel together, we talk about
Yeah.
what do we need, what are the differences. Nick and I are constantly communicating.
Yeah.
I have one brother, we're always like, hey, are you okay with this? Like, I think we're doing this. It just makes things easier
Mm.
because you can talk about it, and you also know that the person will receive, like, hey, like my brother Drew will be like, hey, is it okay if we bring down Juniper, our dog? And every time we love having Juniper, but I always appreciate that he checks because maybe there's a reason why it might not be a good fit,
Yeah.
right? That maybe, our dog is not feeling well or whatever the
Yeah.
case is. And it's
Hmm.
just like, it's just a good check. So,
Mm.
we would love your thoughts. What are the strategies you use? What are the
Yeah.
strategies you found to work? It's Oh, I want to share one last thing, and maybe I'll try to find this and tag it. There's a gentleman, and I'm forgetting his name, but he is a hostage negotiation,
Ooh.
and he's been doing a lot of great work on Instagram on conflict, like navigating conflict. And one of the things that he said, specifically for those of us who might struggle with that fawn or freeze response,
Mm.
is that like if you're going into a situation where there may be like multiple scenarios,
Mm.
is really try to answer the what if in those scenarios and try to come
Mm.
up with strategies like you were saying, like
Yeah.
the C plan. Okay, so what if I bring this up and the response is you're overreacting? What if I
Mm.
bring this up and the response is dismissal? What if I bring this
Mm,
up and the response is somebody gets irate, and because they don't something about how we brought it up, triggered their
mhm,
emotions.
yeah,
And I love that practice, because I know for me that if I can have
mm,
strategies in the moments that tend to paralyze me,
yeah,
um, or cause me to freeze, then
yeah,
it makes it easier, to your point, to push the words out. So that's something too
yeah,
for people who are listening. If you resonate with maybe Teresa's and my, kind of default responses, um, how can you be prepared for, like, okay, if this, then I'm going to try to say this. If this, I'm going to try to ask this question. And just having some tools in your pocket can help you have the courage in the
mm,
moment to say, just as beautifully as the language of step, this our relationship is more important than this conversation. I just want to be clear about that,
yeah. That's
you
a
know?
beautiful way to start. I
Yeah. And
mean, that,
and then the idea of consent, right? The idea
yeah, yeah,
of I would you be open to talking about this? I want to make sure we're both really good, and I want to hear from you. I mean, this is the whole, when we talk about our getting curious with others,
mm,
it's share perspectives and invite perspectives. It's getting curious with each other, right?
mm,
Like, how do we meet
yeah,
in the middle on this? And and that's a good thing for us to keep in mind during the holidays. Like,
sure
I know
is.
this is important, or I want to hear what's important to you, and I'd like to share what's important to me.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay. Well, this has been periodic conversations with Teresa and Sarah, and let us know what resonated, and let us know again, what tools and tips you use or lessons you've learned to help us
yeah,
and help everyone else. And so with that, we wish you all a safe, healthy, happy holiday, whatever that means or needs to look like for you, even if it's just taking time to rest through the end of the year. We wish you all the best.